Hello, everyone. This is Carlo Grante speaking from the Merano Academy, Meran or Merano, depending on whether we use its German or Italian name. I am in South Tyrol, as you see in the background, the Academy's logo with none other than Dante and Goethe, as it is an academy that devotes its efforts to the understanding and dialogue of German and Italian culture, and a typical South Tyrolean heater. This series of lectures is conceived in partnership with the Academy and Off the Hook Arts Festival in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I thank them for hosting these events on musical understanding. So the title, Music Explains Itself. I didn't decide to choose a title like Music Narrates Itself. Neither that I am explaining music or something else explains the unfolding of musical events within a musical composition. I'm trying to give a perspective, sort of tautological perspectives, allow music to explain itself without the aid of clear metaphors or symbols, although music is full of symbols and metaphors, but nothing that can be really called a translation into music of an extra musical significance, or just the opposite, translating music into something else. Although there are many moments, I should say any moment in music that triggers a response. So music can be associated to other arts or to text, but in a sort of synergy, not translation. So we're not going to translate music, but rather try to understand how the musical processes work and unfold in time. So today's theme is forming music. How do we perceive it? I use the term theme, today's theme. And in the first lecture, we spoke about theme, but a musical theme is not really the subject of a lecture, or it's not an idea, an argument, it's really a tune, perhaps, or an assembly of tunes with a determined, clear structure. And also the theme, in order to be called a theme, needs to have a proper, strong role within a musical structure. And what is a musical structure? Well, we think of structures as something that exists in space, a solid structure, building, something that can stand the test of time. But a musical structure is something that unfolds, exists in time, exists really within our mind, how we build or perceive the unfolding of musical events. Unfolding is a term that I will use rather often, and how this unfolding builds a structure. So we'll see how the musical structure is really more of a pathway than really a form. We spoke about themes. In the first lecture, I gave an outlook of the two main archetypical thematic structure, as we have come to call them and use them after the important contribution of Schoenberg. Schoenberg decided, writing in the English language, decided to differentiate these two periods. One period is rather symmetrical, the other, although with the same number of bars, canonical 8 bars, seems to, again, develops a direction in time. So the first theme has a basic idea, a contrasting idea, basic idea, contrasting idea. Sorry that I have to speak at the top of this building. This is antecedent. And now, basic idea, contrasting idea. And the contrasting idea, of course, has a full stop, we should say, a cadence. So we could even use punctuation. Basic idea, comma, contrasting idea, semicolon, antecedent. Basic idea, comma, contrasting idea, full stop. If we were to invert consequent and antecedent, we would have a logical fallacy, so-called affirming the consequent. It wouldn't sound very logical. So this is a very symmetrical, very clear, typically classical, solid structure. What happens when the music unfolds in a less symmetrical but more forward thrusting manner? What do we get? Well, we call that process, that thematic process, sentence. In this case, we have basic idea, and then it repeats, a little varied according to harmonic rules, sequential rules, and that is the presentation, not the antecedent. Basic idea. Again, basic idea. No, small basic ideas, fragmentation, moves. It's very interesting. It's even more tautological. It seems to utilize itself a lot. So this second time of theme, we can have many themes made up of either or a combination of both archetypical structures. This so-called sentence contains some features that individually can be used in a composition to build, again, its structure. Could have, for example, in a composition, a continuational approach to composing and moving, pushing the music forward. And these are the main thematic structures. Why did I say structures? Because the theme, in order to be a theme, needs to have a structure. Otherwise, it would only be a tune. Nothing wrong with it. But see, a theme contributes to the development of structure because it contains some building blocks that would be very useful for the structure. Sometimes it does not. But it does have a role. A tune may not have a role. A theme must have a role, must suggest something. It must recur. We want to look back to the theme often during the composition. There would be composers who do that all the time. Structure. What is a structure in music? Well, first of all, we heard the second movement of the very famous Serenade for Strings by Mozart. It is a composition for strings, and somebody very clever attempted a very funny but interesting and clever compositions, superimposing motifs or themes, played, of course, by wind instruments, so that one could actually perceive the contrasting perspectives of the musical flows. These motifs or themes are embedded, superimposed on the music by Mozart. Now, I leave it to you. Which are motives and which are themes? Let's say motive can be a tune, like the tune we saw last time, famous Nokia tune. I promise I'm not paid by Nokia to say this. It was possibly the most famous motif that we still hear sometimes in concerts, and we don't like it very much, performers, when a cellular phone, when the cellular phone jingle, when it goes off, and we used to hear lots of Nokia themes that are really these things, or tunes rather. This tune was an excerpt from a classical composition by Tárrega. So let's hear these tunes superimposed on Mozart's eine kleine Nachtmusik. In this case, it's called Nichtmusik. It's stolen. This is very funny, but a successful attempt at musical reshuffling, recomposition, vertical superimposing. Oh my God. How desecrated. Again, contrasting at the end, the background, and that tune put on top of it. Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's clever. Well, it works pretty well, actually. Oh, here's another tune. Oh, two tunes. That definitely tunes, not themes. The last two we heard, because they lack their unfolding of structure that we called theme. And also, we have no way of knowing, just by listening to these excerpts, what their role in the composition is or would have been. Well, for those who want to have fun with this music, the author is PDQ Bach, Peter Schickele, and he has done many of these funny musical realizations. I should say, very often with an educational purpose in the background. Now, if we speak of structure, as I said, and we apply this term to architecture, well, here we have an archetype of architectural structure, we should say model of beauty of proportion that we actually, contemporary people, have never seen as it is depicted in this picture. This is a reconstruction of the Parthenon, the temple in Greece, that has been for centuries, we should say probably still is, a model of good proportions. So as you see, if we dwell in this beauty of proportions, spatial proportions, perspective also, we could say, what is it like to swim, to fly within a structure that is three-dimensional, and it unfolds in time. How can it unfold in time? It doesn't. It is not the structure, it is us. We unfold in time if the fruition of this structure, this fixed, still structure, is always a cognitive fruition. We decide how this fruition, again, unfolds in time. But as you can see, this is very important for artists to have a contrast or alternation of full solid shapes and void. Full void. This is very important for a structure to have a meaning, even though there is no actual mechanical, physical function. It's very important to have an alternation of fullness and void. It can also translate in complexity and simplicity. It is no more a spatial, or not only a spatial relation of parameters, elements, but also a cognitive, emotional relation of meanings. Again, these are sculptures. We should say that sometimes the function of structure, architecture, and sculpture overlap. In this case, of course, one is somehow, should say, subdued to the other because it has to fit that structure element in the temple. So this marble group by none other than Phidias, that in fact was placed, the original place, is within a structural element of the temple. You see, our fruition is a little different, and the images that are depicted are more concrete images of our own personal human experience. These are, in fact, human figures. These are also canons of perfection, of beauty, of good relationship between elements. And we're speaking again of something that unfolds in time only because the watcher decides to do so. We can stay, we can linger, we can go around the shape. We could also have an imagery flight within the Acropolis. And enjoy this unfolding of time. Make the structure, should we say, live? The structure doesn't move, doesn't change. Otherwise, it could not be a solid structure. We move around the structure, we enjoy it. So this could be a little far-fetched, but really it is how our mind reacts to physical structure. We can decide, choose the way we approach a three-dimensional structure. But about two-dimensional structures, images, well, if we were to reshuffle the elements of this very famous painting, we would actually destroy the painting. And also Van Gogh's dream, ideal. It has to have a structure. It has to be that way, unless Van Gogh decided to do it differently. And there are several versions of the same subject in many cases. But we have to now observe and let the fruition of a two-dimensional image work in our mind, in our psychology, without necessarily trying to fly within it or around it. Although somebody might want to attempt something of that sort. Attempt the realization of a three-dimensional image out of a two-dimensional image. Can you imagine a picture, a painting turned into something three-dimensional? What would we add to it? Or perhaps what would we subtract from it? Because that painting, that work of art, was also a most successful way of turning necessity into virtue. And that is very much what artists want. They want to create something that would be otherwise absurd, to have something that does not exist in reality, and make it a cognitive reality. Here is how technology creates this three-dimensional illusion. We could also dream to go inside an image. This is a very touching scene from famous Dreams by Kurosawa. It's in episodes, and this episode is very interesting. Would touch many hearts. Certainly those who would have wanted to have met the painter and ask him, how do you do it? Interesting what the painter answers to that. But again, I would say in this case, we're not trying to translate the work of art, rather live it. This is a watcher in a museum who's really taken into within the picture, within the two-dimensional image. See, the image is not really altered, it's his perception of it that develops into a life experience that is also a space experience. Mind you, the music you're listening to is a background. It's not the description of the action. And the action is not, as we have seen, this Fantasia, the description of the music. So now we get more into the core of the matter, unfolding in time. Therefore, we can speak about structure as a pathway. Structure as pathway means we need to move in time, and time is the key element of its, not only its unfolding, but rather of its meaning and how its syntax is organized. Music, as all forms of art, has a syntax, is a language. We could say it has a story. Of course, we don't want to give music, we don't want to limit music to only a narrative device, so that one can actually perceive, imagine, infer a story, an actual story, a real story, or an imagined story to it. Music, as we have seen from the themes, those structures, is made of time units that have to be very well organized to make musical sense. If we take the structure of a fairy tale, for example, well, it cannot follow the beats 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 of music for it to unfold. That's why it is always very dangerous and very limiting to attempt to stick music to a story that unfolds in time according to its own unfolding, that cannot be measured by 1, 2, 3, the beats of musical measures of bands, and its symmetries or asymmetries. But since we're going to talk about a specific musical structure that is called sonata, because this is not a lecture on the sonata form, that would need also perhaps more than one lecture, an explanation of its history, how it developed into what it is now, what it was 100, 200 years ago. Structuralism can show us how similar ways of conceiving stories seem to be rather inborn in us. It cannot be entirely coincidental that through centuries and centuries, people tell stories, especially epic stories or fairy tales, using structures that have a lot in common one another. Of course, we're speaking about invented stories, not history, because if we were to give history the structure that we like, it would no longer be a historical narration, or rather it would be, yes, it could be a play, theatrical play that turns a piece of history into a story. But how a story it is structured, well, I would like to show you, without diverging from our subject, how scholars have devised two ways, rather different at the same time similar, of building a structure. Vladimir Prop and his theory on fairy tale story structure. Again, we now have a teleological approach to structure. That is, there is a destiny within a narration. It doesn't just happen by chance. It has to go somewhere. This is most important for the understanding of a musical form like a sonata. So the theories of Vladimir Prop, there is a hero, of course, important character. But then, if there is a hero, we have to have an anti-hero. And all musicians already think of first theme, second theme, main theme. And then the false hero. Oops, there's something that creates a contrast. We need that. Of course, now the princess, and this doesn't mean doesn't want to be, and the Donald doesn't want to be gender oriented, but it is the classical, one of the classical, perhaps we recognize something that we've already read, fairy tale. So it seems that the artist needs to have these elements of alignment, as well as contrast, of shape, and as well as threats to the shape in order to devise, to create a structure in time that is a successful narration. This is very interesting. And perhaps a more well-known theory, and I would now be quiet for some time so that you can listen to this interesting clip. A very successful attempt at finding a structure and story is, of course, Joseph Campbell's hero theory, so-called hero, the name of the first main essay on it, the hero with 1,000 faces. So, in the theory, we call it the hero's journey. It's a bit like the fairy tale, but there is a certain structure. Some musicians also here could recognize some musical structures, because basically this hero has a mission. So there is a destiny in this story. We find this in many epic narratives, but also many epic, modern epic movies. Well, I will not mention some, because I will have to mention all, but really there have been very, very successful fantasy movies that use this structure. When we're speaking about this structure, of course, we have to use the term teleological structure of a narration, also musical narration.
What do Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo all have in common with the heroes of ancient myths? What if I told you they are all variants of the same hero? Do you believe that? Joseph Campbell did. He studied myths from all over the world and published a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, retelling dozens of stories and explaining how each represents the monomyth, or hero's journey. So, what is the hero's journey? Think of it as a cycle. The journey begins and ends in the hero's ordinary world, but the quest passes through an unfamiliar, special world. Along the way, there are some key events. Think about your favorite book or movie. Does it follow this pattern? Status quo, that's where we start. 1 o'clock, call to adventure. The hero receives a mysterious message, an invitation, a challenge. 2 o'clock, assistance. The hero needs some help, probably from someone older, wiser. 3 o'clock, departure. The hero crosses the threshold from his normal, safe home and enters the special world and adventure. We're not in Kansas anymore. 4 o'clock, trials. Being a hero is hard work. Our hero solves a riddle, slays a monster, escapes from a trap. 5 o'clock, approach. It's time to face the biggest ordeal, the hero's worst fear. 6 o'clock, crisis. This is the hero's darkest hour. He faces death and possibly even dies, only to be reborn. 7 o'clock, treasure. As a result, the hero claims some treasure, special recognition, or power. 8 o'clock, result. This can vary between stories. Do the monsters bow down before the hero, or do they chase him as he flees from the special world? 9 o'clock, return. After all that adventure, the hero returns to his ordinary world. 10 o'clock, new life. This quest has changed the hero. He has outgrown his old life. 11 o'clock, resolution. All the tangled plot lines get straightened out. 12 o'clock, status quo, but upgraded to a new level. Nothing is quite the same once you're a hero. Many popular books and movies follow this ancient formula pretty closely, but let's see how well The Hunger Games fits the hero's journey template. When does Katniss Everdeen hear a call to adventure that gets the story moving? When her sister's name is called from the lottery.
Of course.
How about assistance? Is anyone
here
going to
a
help her on
description
her
of how
adventures?
this
Hey, Mitch.
plot,
What about
this
departure? Does
archetype
she
of a
leave her
plot is
ordinary
applied
world? She gets
to movie as follows. Can I say that a sonata form follows closely this narrative form? Well, it has a lot in common. It has a lot in common. We don't want to, of course, we don't want to be too far-fetched and force something that we have experienced into something that we want to experience. That would be really unprofessional. The sonata form, as it is, as we call it today, was codified when many sonatas with that structure had already been composed. But we're speaking about a year, 1845, when Beethoven was already dead by 10 years, 18 years. Adolf Marx, in this important essay, Lehre der musikalischen Komposition, has provided us with this plot, structure, narrative, and called it sonata form. Of course, Czerny, very clever, had already spoken about it. So the actual attribution of sonata form to Czerny or to Marx is not important to us now. Also, Anton Reicher, his Traité de haute composition musicale in French, he spoke about this shape. There is a sort of palindrome. It's a large binary form just because it has, as we will see, an exposition that will return. But as we have seen in that funny video realization, the hero has to go through some hardships that we will call development. So here is basically the quintessential schematic architecture structure of the sonata form. We're speaking about one movement of sonata, especially the first movement. And we will call any movement in sonata form when it meets these, let's say, these requirements. So there is an A section, a B section. It's already a dichotomy, first, second, or let's call them for now A, B. When they are presented, when they are narrated, we call that overall structure the exposition. Then, of course, the hero has to move forward and meet the challenges. And what happens here is really something that is dialectics, contrasts, fight, dialogue between A and B. Or also with added elements. And it happens interestingly in ways that can be in different ways that seem to have one thing always in common that we call the core, the center, the core of the development. And this core utilizes a specific compositional technique. This is very interesting. Well, this makes all the structuralists very happy. Why do they all use in the core this technical compositional device? Who told them to do so? And all this has been happening for many years before 1845, when the so-called Sonata Form title was invented, developed, devised. So again, here the hero has to go through longer experience compared to what Joseph Campbell discovered the device. There is again, the exposition happens again, but we call it recapitulation. So the journey back is symmetrical. It's not like in a mirror. It's not inverted. It's not, not going back. Again, repeating the journey with some variations, because in music we have, in fact, keys, tonal areas. Now let's do this. Let's hear how a sonata, this is the exposition of the first movement of Mozart Sonata K2 at 1. Let's see how it unfolds in time, touching these steps. Let's remind ourselves that there is a home key. We are at home. And when we move a step from home, the closest step, we call that harmony dominant. But then we want to go back. This is very important. We have to feel the gravity of home, this magnet. And we move from home only to return home at some point. This is the palindromic structure of this type of form. We want to go back home, harmony. So when we move from this to this, that's why when from one theme, principal theme, we move to a second or subordinate theme group, could be more than one theme, but here the harmony plays a very important role. The principal theme, as I said, has to start on the tonic. Antecedent, consequent of a theme. It's more than a tune. It has to have a specific structure. It has to have a thematic structure. And then it moves. It could take some time before it moves away from home and reaches this new state that we call subordinate theme. And this motion, this section, we call transition. Okay, we have in fact moved towards this harmony. And now, finally, we have a new character of the plot. We have this new theme. Usually this theme has contrasting features, a bit different. In this case, this theme, should we say, is sweet. It takes time to unfold itself. So it's more than a tune. We have to reach the end of the exposition. So what we have here is something that Mozart does, so Clementi does, the introduction of a third theme, which is not really a thematic group. It is part of a thematic group, We call it 13. It's a bit audacious to call it 13 because when we speak about sonatas, we speak about two things, but it would be really a bit boring if all sonatas had only that canonical structure, which is canonical because sometimes we need to see it that way. We need to simplify. Shouldn't. So this new theme happens in the same tonal area as the second theme. Therefore, we should say it is part of the second thematic group. It has the same character also. It unfolds with the same symmetry of the theme. And now, okay, now we can reach full stop of, or rather end of the chapter with these devices called codettas, short tails. Now, the way this exposition is graphically organized, it is a typical tree, logical tree. We have this exposition that is made of 4 boxes. First box is made of antecedent consequent because it's a theme, then transition. Third box is made of presentation, continuation, that is a sentence, and then third theme. Fourth box is made of itself. It could be made of smaller boxes, small fragments of codet or codettas. Coda means tail. Now let's see the next. Oh, let's see the next map. What if we were to organize this logical tree vertically? How do we perceive a musical form spatially? How do we imagine it? Is it something that moves from left to right, like the way we write or read? Well, those who read and write from left to right, not all humans. I apologize. I didn't mean to be self-serving. It was just a confirmation bias. There are cultures in which the text doesn't necessarily move horizontally from left to right. How do we imagine time? Some scholars claim that we see the future on our left. How do we imagine the unfolding of music? Left to right, right to left, or in a more spatially creative way? This is an alternative. This is the vertical alternative to a horizontal logical tree. We have again exposition that is made of 4 boxes, and these 4 boxes are made of other boxes. But what about this? A map in which the exposition has principal theme at its left, but where's the semantic subordinate theme is now right. The transition is not between principal theme and subordinate theme, but somewhere else. And the presentation of the theme, okay, the continuation, look, it's a bit more complex. Complex, possibly could even be simpler because it's like these cognitive spheres that hover in our mind, in our mental space. We imagine the unfolding of a musical composition this way. This is just an attempt. It could be in infinite different ways. Now we have the development section. So what happens here? The hero's journey's most interesting unfolding of events. We will hear the first thing, perhaps, maybe also the second thing. Well, but this is Mozart, not Beethoven. So what does Mozart do? Mozart is very clever at using the form in a very personal way, creating many contrasts, asymmetries, but we don't even notice them. So let's hear each section. Yes, that's a theme. But what section of the theme? I was shocked. That's the consequent of the theme, not the antecedent. Why did he do that? What happens now? The core. This is a sequence. It's a rather dramatic way of conceiving a specific moment in the sonata structure. So let's go and see this long post core. The core, is it really finished? We have no more sequences. Now, no more themes. Everything seems to be new. Oh, and now we are in E flat major. Oh, the inversion of a device we've already heard. It's rather creative, but finally we reach the dominant of the key that invites us to go back home. And that small moment, which we take the path home, is called retransition. And what comes next? We know. Again, the exposition in recapitulation style. That is, the two themes now no longer belong to different areas. So we have this principal theme. We have the transition, subordinate, third theme, and codettas, and go on. Enough of this. Now, it was Edward Tolman in 1948 to initiate the concept of cognitive map. Somebody might have recognized a device that is used by students when they study, for example, history. So this cognitive map, having these spheres, logical spheres, concepts, the more colored they are, the better, also with some drawings. So according to this, what the subject experiences from the world is subject to an elaboration that organizes it as a kind of map. We have this map. We need maps. Well, now we use navigators. Yes, I am one of them. I'm rather lazy. I don't look at maps. I put on my navigator on and I can drive safely. Sometimes I even manage to get lost with the navigator, but perhaps we should resort to maps. But musicians, especially performers, especially those who perform from memory, need to have this map of the piece. So the spatial representation of the surrounding environment translated into music, in our case, is the harbinger of its graphic expression, our own mental map, which is its explication. Okay, let's do something a bit of a nightmare. What if we were to reshuffle these moments of the sonata form into something random? Imagine a piece that starts like this. then follows. Then and then it's weird. Well, the first movement of the sonata is pretty much there, and the map is, in fact, random. Cadetas, or the recapitulation. Well, at least we approach the end. Now, let's wake up from this nightmare and listen to the first movement of the K281 Sonata by Mozart, fully performed without randomizing its elements. This is me performing it in one of my Bösendorfer recitals. You have been seeing the credits of the organizing production team. I will comment on the sections as they unfold. Of course, the exposition gets repeated, so I will only comment when it first performed, not when it gets repeated. Same goes for the development and recap. Okay, so the performance sits and starts with a theme, principal theme, antecedent and consequent. Main idea, contrasting idea, consequent, main idea and cadence. Now this is the transition that leads to the other theme. What happens now? We are approaching the dominant, that other harmony. In fact, here is the subordinate theme, different character. So it's a different character of the plot. Which is the hero? Where is the hero? Is it a theme or is it a concept, a mood? But now we have to approach a new theme, which belongs to the same group as the second theme. It's also symmetrical. And let's see what happens now. We have a little tail, coda. Okay, we finish the exposition. End of the exposition. Finally. And now I repeat and I shut up. End of the exposition. Development. We have to reach a core, something dramatic, a moment of drama. What is this? Oops, that's the first theme. Is it antecedent or consequent? It is the consequent. Oh, that's a mistake. Uh-oh. Sequence. That is the core, the drama. But it's not over. And now what's next? We've heard that already in the contrasting idea of the principal theme. Oh, that's weird. Seems not to end. Oh, this is completely new. A new key, a new device. This is the inversion of a device used in the third theme. So that's the development. It seems to be reshuffling of many elements. Oh, that's the retransition to the first theme. Good. Consequent, see? Oh, that we heard in the development. Consequent starts here, that was the contrasting idea, and now we need a little cadence to end the theme, and finally reach the transition. Okay, transition. Let's move to the second theme. And the second theme, oh, this is in the same key, in the same home. So it's rather definite. Does it mean that the hero is back home according to the hero's journey theory? Or rather that the hero is really reapproaching home? Is this the status quo? Well, it is the home key. So we hear exactly what we heard in the exposition in this case, but in the home key. And here ends the recap. Okay, that's the structure. So I would like to welcome you to our next lecture. Again, we will treat a dichotomy, consonance and dissonance this time. We've had first theme, second theme, and some people like to associate themes also to contrasting characters and contrasting archetypes of character, like Apollos, Dionysus. We have such a thing also within the inner dialectics of consonance and dissonance in music. That is a rather tricky subject, but I will be happy to at least give it a try at explain how we perceive in music tension and release, and how these two elements, these two states, emotional states, we should say, contribute to the expressiveness in musical perception and also in musical performance. Thank you.